Good morning, Crystal. Um, I want to do a short video today, and I'll send you an email with the link and ask that you take a look at it and send me the code word to show me that you've listened. Um, this week, chapters 13 and 14 are being discussed. Chapter 13 is macroeconomics, and number 14 involves the government. They're very interrelated. Macroeconomics, the science of economics, is divided really into two different uh, uh, types: microeconomics and macroeconomics. And the forces that affect those two different levels of economic activities are related to largely to size. Um, Microeconomics is about what you and I do with our personal economic activity, our purchases, our decisions that we make to borrow money or to spend money or whatever we do on a local level. Microeconomics has to do with um, uh, companies, individual companies that make decisions and how they do that. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, the word macro means big, of course, and the involves large systems, governments, whole economies. Macroeconomic factors and data include things like gross domestic product, gross national product, and those sorts of things, government activities. So as a result of sheer size, there's an inertial factor to how macroeconomics may affect the way we live. As an example, in terms of of people like you and me, when we have a change in, say, employment or a change in income for any reason, whether it's up or down, it has an immediate effect on us. We make decisions. We either make, if our income goes up, we can make decisions that allow us to make, purchase things that we may need or want, or go on vacations that we couldn't afford, or whatever. There are many things that we do. If our income goes down, then we make decisions about what we are not going to buy, or we make the decision to go into debt for a period of time to be able to continue a lifestyle. But we adjust things, and that adjustment is virtually immediate. In a macroeconomic system, however, the forces that change that, let's look at healthcare as a good example. If healthcare is what we call a public good, which means that it's shared throughout the system, throughout the society, pretty much on an equal basis. I mean, in theory. In practice, of course, that isn't true, but in theory, the science here, or the factors here, are that if there is a downturn in the economy, if the government, for instance, as it did in 1998, cuts payments to something like the nursing home industry, which is exactly what happened when during a budget reconciliation omnibus bill passed in 1998, cut payments to nursing homes. That didn't happen instantaneously. I mean, it happened very quickly, but it didn't happen instantaneously because, of course, there were payments still on the books that needed to be paid. The government pays on a 90-day lag, while most businesses pay on a 30-day period scale. But the choice to make to make those decisions, then we have the government has budgets. So it doesn't affect immediately. The budgets are passed a year in advance. They're actually developed they're largely developed a couple of years in advance, even if the Congress and the executive branch do not put off doing anything about it until the last minute. But nonetheless, there is a lag time, so the effect doesn't take effect right away. Nursing homes are a good example. They knew that their income was going to significantly drop, and they started looking at how they can ameliorate that. But you can't just suddenly fire everybody, because you have a legal responsibility to deliver a certain level of care. So the timing is slow. So by the time that effect really hit, and they were able to respond, it's a lag. It's behind the 8 ball. So the issue is that these things don't have the same immediate effect. Companies can make decisions, but the immediate effect is delayed. So the major determinants of healthcare spending, total healthcare spending, really are at the macro level. They're involved. Macroeconomics includes the whole issue of inflation. Inflation is a systemic issue. Each of us can see that when we see in our own life. We get a raise. That's inflation. We see prices going up, mostly faster than our money goes up, and that inflationary spiral or cycle affects what we can buy with the same amount of money. But on a larger scale, inflation is considered throughout the economy, and it's also related to population changes, growth or shrinkage, and gross domestic product issues. The issue is that let's just say that the healthcare system has to contract, which implies that we will have fewer physicians. Well, physicians don't generally just get fired. And of course, we have a supply. The whole process of education and licensure is a time-consuming process. So when there are institutional features such as licensure, third-party reimbursements, and so forth, these make the adjustment of the healthcare system slow compared in response to changes in inflation and changes in government reimbursement and so forth. These macroeconomic shrinkage of the gross domestic product and so forth. So a lot of times what happens is there's an effect that requires that we look at regulatory changes in terms of cost controls, possibly, or reimbursement changes. We've seen a number of these. The prospective payment system, the DRG system, all of these were efforts to control prices. In fact, they didn't really work in any meaningful way, except very much in a short-term situation. A number of times we've seen politicians tout fixes to the system that worked, but they were fixes that were that were already in place. And again, the effect is slow, and sometimes it's the apparent effect really is in response to macroeconomic changes that preceded these so-called changes. So and those so we look at these cost control regulations, and the effect that we think we see are really delayed effects of macroeconomic factors such as inflation, such as recession or expansion of economies. These are all things that take time to filter down into the system. So macroeconomics and microeconomics really almost work the opposite. With us, if you and I lost a job, we would simply adjust our spending from that day. We wouldn't say, okay, well, unless we knew we were going to be getting another job. I mean, a good example here might be when my wife was working as a PT. PTs always can find employment. If she got fed up working for a certain employer, she was in home health, and there's a range of those kinds of positions. If she got really upset and tired of working for one employer and quit, which she did on occasion, we didn't have anything to worry about for two reasons. Number one, generally speaking, I had a good job. So what we did was we did it without a few luxury expenses. We didn't go out to dinner as often, etc. So we made those decisions, and then very quickly she was able to find a job. Medicine is that way. However, let's go to Flint, Michigan, where Ford had a plant in Flint that employed 82,000 people. They closed the plant, or they actually really went mainly to they really downsized the plant. Went from 82,000 to about 8,000 people. So about 90% of the employees were out of work. Well, their choices were to try to find other work, which wasn't easy to do, or to move. And in many cases, moving is not a good option, because how are you going to move? How are you going to find a place to live, et cetera? You move where the jobs are, and then that just didn't work out for many of them. Sometimes it was good reasons, and sometimes, in my opinion, it was not so good reasons. But there are always reasons, and I can't really judge someone else's reasoning when they make those decisions. But the issue is that that those jobs disappeared. Now that plant supposedly is going to reopen, but it's not going to hire another 70 some odd thousand people, because it's mainly going to be robotic. So they'll still have a smaller workforce, significantly smaller. The changes in healthcare really on a macroeconomic level are to take a look at it at a high level. The healthcare spending is largely from labor. There are obviously capital expenses. That's a little different issue. These are not macro issues. They can be. There's a lot of money involved, but capital expenses are different than ongoing expenses. Capital expenses get expensed, but the accounting system treats them very, very differently in terms of depreciation, et cetera. the biggest thing is your variables, your wages being and labor costs being probably the largest variable cost that any employer has, and the growth shows up as higher wages because doctors and nurses and therapists and everybody do expect to get paid and paid well for their expertise. And there's in terms of these kinds of fee for service are really the biggest part of it. There's a couple of things in this chapter. Let's go to this forecasting future health expenses. The issue is to forecast these things. We usually forecast by looking back. There's a sort of mantra in science, the science of forecasting, and behavioral science for that matter, that past behavior predicts future behavior. Is this perfect? Absolutely not. However, if you're going to be forecasting forward, we need to look back. And the rule of thumb is that for every year you want to look forward, you look back 3 years. Your text talks about a 5-year forecast, looking back 15 years and recognizing that there are variations, but on the whole, the assumption is the change is going to be fairly consistent over those periods of time, and that we can project. Why do we do this? For planning purposes. If you are going to expand, say, your long-term care facility, you're looking at the growth of patients, the growth of the technology, and looking to expand and looking at the various levels. Long-term care facilities have several different levels. There's the residential care, and the cost of that at several different levels, from assisted living through full skilled nursing care. We have memory care. We have rehab. Many of the nursing homes that I looked at when we were looking for a place to put my father had all of these levels of care. And so when you're looking at how do you forecast how do you do your financial planning, you're always looking some years into the future. 3 to 5 years is sort of the minimum that you want to look to make plans for hiring, for expansion, for contracts with vendors, for a lot of different reasons. So we do this, and it's always a guess. I used to do sales forecasts when I was in the pharmaceutical industry for a while, and our mantra was that forecasting is difficult, especially if you're talking about the future. There's an old joke too about the soothsayer who could predict the past very accurately. So there was, and it all also depends on technology. As we develop better ways of treating diseases, as we understand things like the various points along the spectrum of dementia, we change the way we actually handle these things. Another aspect here is efforts at cost control. We have always tried to control costs, and there are lots of ways. There was an effort under Nixon to impose wage and price controls throughout the economy, and he actually made it stick. It was a tough call, especially for a Republican, but he made it stick because it was a necessity at the time, because inflation was just going crazy, and the recession that we experienced in 1970 was really harsh on the economy, and wage and price controls do get imposed in emergency conditions. We've had wartime price controls and rationing and so forth for the greater societal good. But there is, anytime we impose those controls, when they're lifted, there is a period of inflation that follows, and prices rise to the level ultimately, again, this is a macroeconomic issue, they rise ultimately to the level they would have risen in the absence of such controls. So it really went crazy. So several efforts were made along the way to put in other things. Carter tried voluntary effort to constrain costs, and it was promoted as a way for the people to work together to reduce the inflation. So did it work? Well, it was said to work, but it turns out that again, the consumer price index is always leads this process. There's a lag in the response to the CPI because which is another a measure of inflation in the economy. Because as planners, again, we've done our planning. We're 5 years out. We can't just suddenly change the way we're going to do everything because the CPI changes in a way that we didn't expect, either higher or lower. So it takes a while for this to filter down into the system. So we tried the same thing with the prospective payment system, with the DRGs. Each of these efforts resulted in what looked like a response to these regulations. And again, macroeconomics tells us that that response could not have been immediate because, again, we have done our planning. We have been looking, the forces that caused us to look at prospective payment system and the DRGs were in place. The regulations were in response to those pressures. The pressures, again, don't come out, don't manifest themselves until, a couple of years usually after they're recognized. And while it looks like these things work, they haven't. We still, last year, our total bill in 2018 versus 2017 for healthcare was very significantly over 5% higher. I think it was about 5.5% higher, far outstripping inflation and the CPI. So let's go back here. Let's move on to Chapter 14, Role of Government and Public Goods. What are public goods? Public goods are those services that are used throughout the society. If you look at the Constitution of the United States, the preamble talks about to provide for the general welfare and the common defense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The purpose of government. The purpose of government is to provide an atmosphere, a system and a structure in which the people can lead their lives not only safely but prosperously, theoretically. The public good is a pure public good is something that's consumed by everybody. Well, healthcare is consumed by everybody, even if it's to the extent of just going down and buying Band-Aids. So it should be there. So among other things, besides healthcare, public sanitation, clean air, information, these are all public goods. And many people, and these public goods should be available to all without restriction, but without paying taxes, then basically people are trying to get a free lunch, which is one of the issues that we have right now that's being struggled with by a number of politicians as to the fact that we have mega corporations like Amazon and Facebook and many of the pharmaceutical companies that make billions in profit and pay little to nothing in taxes, and yet they benefit from the taxes that the rest of us pay. We're struggling with that. Other things that are there, the history of this is that as the society develops, we see these public goods. A good example in your text is collecting garbage. Back in the old days, when we were fairly agrarian economy and thin, and not too many of us, and we were scattered all over the place. We either buried or threw or just dropped or burned or somehow destroyed our garbage. We started moving into cities, and we can't have garbage fires in everybody's backyard, nor can we throw our garbage over the fence into the neighbor's yard. So we established a public system of collecting and disposing of garbage. And depending on where you are here in the city, of course, we have the landfills. If you going back into a more rural setting, I'll talk about my cousin in Virginia who has a farm about 25 miles north of Richmond. They burn a lot of their trash. They compost, what's compostable, but the stuff that has to be thrown away and can't be burned, they have to take to a public landfill. They have to transport it. They don't have the garbage trucks coming by. So we have the various system, but it's a system where we put the trash into a specified location or we destroy it. Or recycle it into the environment. The government should be the agent for maximizing the public welfare. There are certain things that the society needs the government for: common currency, a media, infrastructure for the efficient operation of the society, roads. In Europe, we have a tremendous public transportation system that grew up in the United States. We have local public transportation systems, but a very limited nationwide system. But nonetheless, we do have that. Proper regulations for the safety, the Common defense is controlled by the government. Now we've moved into looking at other public goods like healthcare. As healthcare has become important, that has become a public good, and the government should be working with that. And see if we go back to here. Let's take a look at it. So who paid for Pasteur to discover bacteria? Well, actually, the French government did. They supported his laboratory. And who benefited from it? The society, because what pasteurization now has made for safe things like milk and other products. The discovery of bacteria helped spur research ultimately into the curing of disease, the development of vaccines, and so forth. The issue, there are many the question about here about clean water or the theory of relativity, public goods. Theory of relativity is science and information. Clean water benefits everyone. The theory of relativity can be argued not to benefit a whole lot of people, except that we do benefit from it in terms of all the electronics and everything. There is a relativity issue there. Are they free or costly? No. That depends on how you define it. They cost money, period. Relativity is information. It costs money to finance Einstein's work to develop that theory, and then the many scientific efforts that have gone into studying it, again, paid for by the government, but the amount of money paid for that is minimal compared with the benefits. One of the major benefits that comes out of understanding relativity is the functioning of a GPS system. The GPS system understands that there is a lag time between what you see and what actually happened, and has to adjust for that in order to tell, because you've got a satellite moving that is constantly moving, that is the source of locating you on the GPS system. Are they free or costly? It depends. For you and me, it's free. But that is that relativity. Clean water, they're costly. It costs money to clean up water. We pay taxes for it. Treatment of syphilis be part of the public health system or private medical care? Well, syphilis at one point was a major scourge. It killed a lot of people. It led to the effects of the disease on the psychological activity of people who suffer from it are clear. So that's a good question. So I think that is a public health issue as well. Psoriasis, psychosis, scoliosis. Psychosis has its public effect. Psoriasis is generally it's not a communicable disease, nor is scoliosis. So psychosis isn't communicable. However, psychotic behavior can have a public effect. Why not charge people full price for vaccinations? Then they wouldn't get them. And the public health effects of vaccinations are well established. Why are new surgical techniques developed with public funds, whereas pharmaceutical research and development conducted privately for nonprofit firms? Again, it's a matter of whose bottom line is going to be enhanced. surgical techniques are often developed with public funds because they're done. These techniques are developed in two real places, actually, teaching hospitals and research hospitals, and the military. The effect of war on medicine has been profound, and especially emergency medicine. People are alive today, including possibly me, because the techniques for handling medical emergencies that arise have come out of having to handle them for the military, especially anything involving rapid bleeding. Should I pay taxes to care for the poor? That's really sort of an interesting question, in that they're a segment of society. So there's two things here. There's a moral issue. How do we help those who have less than us? And there is another issue, which is, chances, most of us, quite frankly, are one disaster short of bankruptcy, of being poor. So there's an argument for that. I mean, other people may feel differently, but there is an argument for that. Medical care for the homeless and terminally ill patients, public good or a waste of money? I think it depends on your viewpoint. Anyone who's been homeless probably would not consider it a waste of money. Anyone who has AIDS certainly wouldn't consider it a waste of money. AIDS is a communicable disease, even though it's hard, actually, to transfer it. Do preferences of smokers, patients who are mentally ill, or unborn children count when assessing the efficiency of the public health system? Public health is such a minor amount of our bill that assessing that really goes into a bag of worms that I don't think we have time here. We do have a public health class, so that's a good debate for there. The question number 10 is an interesting one. Theoretically, the FDA and other agencies that regulate health should operate strictly in the interest of the public. The people who work there should be working there to serve the public, or special interest lobbies. Unfortunately, lobbying is a major factor here. It's called regulatory capture is the term that is used, and we see it all the time. The ability of special interest groups to assert undue influence on the government, to where the government usually not necessarily the individual people working in the various government agencies, but at higher levels, at Congress and at the very top of these agencies, which are all run by appointees who may or may not know anything about the way the agency actually works, are often influenced by this lobbying efforts. Special interest lobbies will come and present information that puts their position in an important place. There's generally not an anti-lobby, if you will, of people going in and saying, no, this is not for the good of the people. We trust our government, possibly foolishly, to be able to recognize the difference. What about the employees? Well, the employees ought to be working for the public. But unfortunately, as the government's no different from anything else, we have ambition and we have bureaucratic self-interest. The increasing budgets for higher salaries and getting more employees so that workloads can be reduced. All of these things is a major can be influences, and they do. As I said, ideally, the people working there would be working for the public, and most of the people do. Especially the people in the trenches. I've done a lot of work over the years and known a lot of people at the FDA and even some of the higher positions, some of the career department heads and division heads and so forth are people who have to play the bureaucratic game but want to do their job well. But they're sort of stuck with it, and then they get whipsawed by the political issues. So, do people vote for what is good for society or good for themselves? Well, the answer to that is yes, to both. Mostly, people will be looking at what is good for themselves. They'll work for the good of the society when that will benefit them. Rarely will people vote to, for instance, increase their taxes for things that are not of interest to them. One of the things that we see is it also depends on the issue, and it depends on when in your life. We see states like Arizona and Florida, which have large retiree communities, opposing taxes for education, for instance. They don't see that they benefit. Now, it's short-sighted in my opinion, but without education, who's going to take care of them? But they are very short-term oriented. In terms of other things, if we look at the debate about healthcare, it's very clear that we have a lot of people, the majority of people, want our healthcare system to be improved, not destroyed by destroying the ACA, the Affordable Health Care Act. We saw that a couple of years ago when Congress could not get the votes to actually make those changes. So there is a little bit, but the problem is when we say, okay, well, if you want this system to work, we're going to have to raise taxes. Then that's a different issue. That's very again, that goes from a public good, which is healthcare, to a private cost, which is taxes, and that's a different debate entirely. So there's a mix of a lot of different things. When we look at the healthcare system, we have many structures. One of the things that we talk about public health. Public health is a real contentious issue. It's only about 3% of what we spend, and yet public health efforts are seen as expensive. Anything that's only 3% of a large system it needs to be examined in light of the entire system. When we look at hospitals and physician payments being 51 or more percent of the money that's actually paid into the system, which is about almost $2 trillion in 2018. Then we need and when you look at only 3% of the bill being for public health, we're talking the difference between a few $billion versus a couple of $trillion. then we need to be looking at that in a different way. The bill for healthcare in this country is pretty horrendous. But the thing to consider is again what's the public good, and then in order to determine what the public good is, we need to understand what the public is. One of the issues about health, the debate that to me is interesting about the whole debate about Medicare for all is that the public good is for everyone, and yet the role of money is such that the people that are very, very wealthy, and I include unfortunately our legislative branch at the federal level. Salaries for those people are $174,000 a year, and they go up every couple of years automatically. They would be considered the wealthy, and they can afford all this health care. But the rest of us who don't make anywhere near that, then are faced with trying to find those health issues. The issue is what is also important in the public health issues, substance abuse, mental illness. Mental illness includes the rising number of dementia cases that we look at. Other more contentious issues such as stopping smoking, alcohol abuse, addiction in general, abortion, all of these things are part of the public debate, but they also are often fraught with emotional issues. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about these two chapters. Let's go back to a new share here and go to, I don't want the screen. I don't want that. No, okay. We'll do that, and then we'll go here, and I think this is where we are. Yes, okay. So your assignment this week is to look up this document that you can access by clicking. I just checked it to make sure it's there. There's a couple of page art. It's a PDF, so just take a look at it and do that writing. You need to catch up on last week's assignment as well. I saw you've done the discussions from last week and this week. Good. That's really good. Notice that last week I gave you a couple of options on the first assignment, which is to look at the role of physicians in hospital cost and revenue flows, or do some studying about basic economics. And how they work differently for healthcare. So I'll leave that up to you as to what to do. So please send me an email when you've watched this. And the code word for today will be Athens, ATHENS. So I will see you on Monday at 8 a.m. I'll be sending you a link to that video. It's the same link we've been using, so it'll just be another one that's set up. So I will see you at 8 o'clock on Monday, and we'll get the last week going. Please get caught up. I'd like to see you really do well in this class. To me, it's an interesting class. Policy decisions are driven by economics. You know, understanding the economics of healthcare is critical for your career. So anyway, I will talk with you Monday, and have a good weekend. Again, if you have anything that you have questions, go ahead and email me.